Hey everybody, welcome to this lecture on the 4 facial features, which are ears, noses, mouths, and eyes. And the point of this is to help you look at these features, ears, noses, mouths, and eyes, both as realistic flesh and blood examples and also sculpted examples, as you see here, to better prepare you for your upcoming project, which is to create an original bust. So you say, well, but okay, prepare us, but you rarely see these things isolated. You don't see the features isolated. You see them in the context of a face, or in art, you call it a bust, also known as a sculpted human head, which will be your assignment. But let's look at some of them, and you can see all the features, and you realize how complex they look as a group, right? Like this ancient bust of Nefertiti, and different examples from around the world which have varying examples of realism, or in this case, stylization and simplification. Or here, this ancient Greek model which is idealized, and just beautiful examples from out the world. And I hope that you find many on your own that you gravitate towards. That's the point. Not only individual features, but also busts, renderings of the human form that you find interesting. So for our purposes, when you isolate individual features, the point of this is that when you isolate features, then sculpt them bigger than they actually are. And we will make them 1.5 to twice their size. What it causes you to do is inspect them closely and to look at form and structure in a new way. It forces you to. So in order to prepare you for this, you'll be collecting 8 images of each feature. That's your R&D this week, is to find 8 images of each feature. 4 actual examples of the facial features, flesh and blood examples, real people or real things, and 4 sculpted examples. Like this, 4 ears, 4 examples, and you'll quickly spot basic sculptural differences. For example, if you look here, you see that this is an attached lobe, right? It goes right to the head, and this is a detached, and that's one really, obvious distinction between ears. This is the floppy one. And you're then going to collect 4 examples of noses, as you see here, and you might want to vary with age and ethnicity and all kinds of things. Find really different ones. So 2 that are frontal views, at least 2. And in all these cases, you can do more than just the bare minimum, but do at least 4 of each feature. And with ears, pretty much you can only take a shot or 2. You can't really get a bunch of variations. But with noses, you can definitely get frontal and side views, and you'll need those views so that you're able to look at that object and sculpt it, right? Do you recognize this celebrity? Just from her schnoz? Well, I guarantee if she's saying, you definitely recognize her. But anyways, also you're going to find 4 examples of mouths, right? Meaning 4 frontal views, but also 4 side views. Again, so that as you sculpt, you can see the form from different angles. And one tip that I have for you is to avoid teeth for now. It doesn't mean eventually you won't want to sculpt somebody with their mouth open or doing an expression where you see teeth, or and there's all kinds of ways to abbreviate teeth. So you don't have to sculpt every individual one. But for now, it's a complicated problem. So I think maybe wait for now, unless you're really industrious. Anyways, and you're also going to collect 4 examples of eyes, right? 2 that are frontal views, and 2 that are side views, for the same reason as all of them. So you can see them from multiple angles, and you'll quickly notice other obvious structural differences here. The most common, probably, as you see in this example, is the epicanthal fold, right, that you see described here. Anyways, you'll start to learn a lot of these little distinctions about all of the facial features. Then you'll also collect 4 sculpted examples of each feature. So you're going to collect 4 flesh and blood examples, and then 4 sculpted examples to compare the transitions of form and sculpture created by the artist. How did they handle it? How did they look at an actual feature and then try to translate it into form? Because if you focus on one thing, one simple form, and you slow down and focus on making what deciding what makes that structure unique, we can teach ourselves to render. You can teach yourself to render or reproduce these isolated collections of forms. I know it sounds simplistic, but if you break it down into really small parts, it really does work. And if you do them really, really well, any one form, then maybe we'll eventually end up combining forms to create something like this, or like this, Michelangelo's David, or the Venus de Milo. All right, just saying. That's how it works. That's the process of learning how to sculpt. So before you start sculpting, make sure you also collect 4 sculpted ears. And you're going to look out in history, and you're going to find examples of ears here, very simple, from Egypt, that you like. For example, I really like these because they're so simplified and stylized, right? And I like these too, Roman, for a different reason. They're very true to form and true and very hyper-real, actually. Again, a sort of neoclassical, and sort of a neoclassical, also a takeoff on the Greeks. But and all of these trying to various, degrees of realism and applying different degrees. Sculpted noses. So you're going to look out at there in history and find sculpted noses in various forms and focus on them and get images of them from various angles, right? As you see here. And a more refined and thin nose, right? Or again, here's the Beethoven nose, right? So in this case, the idea of rendering this person's, characteristics very true to form was important, right? And maybe not so much in other cases where it's more of a sort of a broad idea of who that person was. I thought this was fun. I was in a museum in Berlin and saw this collection of noses that had been knocked off of sculptures, and they couldn't find their home. Where do you belong, nose? I don't know. All right, sculpted mouths. You're going to find, again, and this is interesting, just to look at any one sculpture and then look very specifically at how the artist handled that aspect. Or here, how do you use a mouth expressively? They avoided the teeth here, but boy, it sure is expressive, right? Or here, a very voluptuous mouth, right, on this sculpture. Or here, with Beethoven again, serious guy, very sort of stern, and you see a very thin upper lip, right, and kind of a pouted, clenched lower lip, right? Or in this case, the eyes are important. Everything's important, but the mouths here between these two figures is very important. So there's almost, she's saying something, or there's something about to be said. So there's a sense of intimacy created through the mouths even. Or here, nice, thinking about how to handle things like hair and stuff with the mouth, but also how were the lips distinguished, and also that slightly open mouth that is about to say something, or it almost implies you're thinking, right? There's something you're about to say, right? And here is, just a beautiful example of realistic sculpture, right? And I wanted to show you this kind of unique idea of sculpting here. This is, of course, the Arc de Triomphe in the middle of Paris. And these relief sculptures on the side are meant to be seen. They're designed to be seen and viewed from below at a distance. So all these sculptural elements have to be hyperbolic. In other words, they had to be really exaggerated. So you can find the original models and go see those. And that's what these are in their actual scale. And everything, because of the distance softens things, and you don't maybe see the dramatic expression that the artist wanted you to see. So they had to make them look overly exaggerated. Otherwise, it'd be hard to read them, right? So, all right, so there's mouths, and now you're going to also find 4 sculpted eyes. And here you see really simplistic sculpted eyes from Egypt, which became a little bit more complicated, but in general, they're pretty flat. But then in time, during various epochs, they became more realistic, until they were very realistic with Nefertiti, right? One of the gorgeous sculpture. I mean, look at that, right? The elegant, beautiful neck and all the features, but the eyes especially. Anyways, you can see how different eyes were handled, either simplistically or successfully or not so successfully, right? Beautiful example. And in this case, the pupil and the iris were not, carved in or insinuated at all. And there's a possibility that could have been painted at one point, but it doesn't really seem to matter. But it's really, you'll notice also the distinction of the difference in all the shapes of eyes and how everyone is like a fingerprint. They're all different, right? One of the most famous sculptures in the world, the Venus de Milo, which you can see in the Louvre in Paris. But beautiful. All the features are just incredibly well rendered. Again, from the Arc de Triomphe and the really furrowed brow, right? Over exaggerated to be seen at a distance, right? And sort of regal, serene eyes here. And one of my heroes, Marcus Aurelius, actually one of the enlightened emperors of Rome, they say, that one of the 5 enlightened emperors of Rome. And he wrote a book, and when I see him, I just think of his book called Meditations, and it is one of the most, just thoughtful books. So when I see his face, I always equate it with my feelings about his writing. But a very serene man who wielded incredible power, but also wrote in a very beautiful way. Anyways, all right, and eyes, eyes are eyes are eyes, right? But then some eyes are just downright creepy. All right. But what nuances can features convey in general, right? All the features can conspire to convey something. Like, for example, in a comical way, so what about Goth Girl? I mean, she's a bit morose, don't you think, right? In a funny way, but, or her sister Emo, can you define taciturn? I'm having a problem with my energy level, whatever. All right. Or the collective knowledge of this composition, which I think is kind of like, I don't know, it has something really positive about it. Her gaze, hey man, I see a big world just out there and I will absolutely confront it. I mean, she just has a forward-thinking look. Or, hey, I can't believe the unfathomable depth of my own thoughts. Anyways. Or, hey dudes, Bacchus here. Check out my smiley eyes. And it's an interesting part of eyes that they can look as if they're smiling if they're puckery at the bottom. I mean, look at it, right? And part of that has to do with his eyes. Or in this case, and Rome is full of these, very serious sculptures like Trajan here. Attention there. Don't you know I ruled the Western world in regal dress and dramatic light, just like this. With this imperial gaze of privileged self-assurance. Anyways, sculptures that are sort of propagandic. Wah, 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 whatever. Or, don't you understand that this guarded posture shows the very core of my emotional intensity? Anyways, sounded like a romance novel or something. Or, hey, I'm just incredibly annoyed. Or, don't mess with me. The laser beam of my adolescent stare will turn you to stone. All right. Or Mr. Lintz. Wow, I simply can't believe the deadpan resolve of these furrowed brows can grow any bushier. Look at those things. Those things are incredible. All right. Or, hey, I simply want to see things straight up and honestly. Bottom line, whatever our interpretation, well-rendered and orchestrated sculptures are what constitute an effective sculpture. Well-orchestrated and rendered parts, how you put the parts together, is what constitutes an effective sculpture. Like the Venus de Milo here, considered perhaps the most beautiful female figure ever sculpted. Or this, Michelangelo, equally acclaimed rendering of masculine resolve. Or this by Millot, or Rodin, or this, or this, or this, or this. The common process is, one starts simply, then as skills and perceptions increase, things develop and grow more and more and more complexly until, wow, how'd that happen, right? And that's how the creative process goes. But before we get carried away, go collect 8 examples of each feature, other than those shown here, then go and render them in ear, eye, nose, and mouth. and expect of yourself a masterpiece, right? At least, maybe a mini masterpiece. Good enough for now. Goodbye.